The first drilling truck arrived on a Tuesday. By Friday, there were 23 more. Dust rolled constantly across the county roads while giant equipment trailers thundered past fence lines that hadn't changed in 50 years. Everybody in Mason County talked about oil now. At the diner, at church, at feed stores, at gas stations. Oil, oil, oil. Because one thing changes rural towns faster than almost anything: the possibility of sudden money. 16-year-old Ethan Carter stood beside a cattle gate one hot summer morning watching a convoy of drilling trucks disappear down the valley road. Then he looked toward the hills beyond his family's pasture and frowned. His father noticed immediately. "What?" Ethan kept staring. "They're going the wrong way." Silence. Thomas Carter leaned against the fence. "What?" Ethan pointed toward distant ridges. "They're setting rigs on the South Flats." His father shrugged. "Looks that way." Long pause. Then, "That's bad." Thomas looked over slowly. Because Ethan rarely said things dramatically, he usually stayed quiet. Worked hard. Watched things. Thought too much. His mother called him an old man trapped inside a teenager. Now Ethan stood staring toward the drilling convoy with genuine concern. Thomas folded his arms. "You know something about oil now?" Ethan shook his head. "No." "Then what's wrong?" Ethan looked toward the hills again. "Water." The Carter farm sat on 200 acres outside western Oklahoma, where drought and flash floods both arrived without warning, depending on the season. The land rolled unevenly through shallow valleys and dry creek systems most outsiders ignored completely. Locals didn't, especially ranchers. Because ranchers learned one thing early: water always decides who's right eventually. Ethan understood the property unusually well for his age, mostly because he spent years wandering it alone. Creeks, drainage paths, soil shifts, flood channels. He noticed things, remembered things. Things adults usually ignored until they became problems. 3 years earlier, a storm dumped nearly 9 inches of rain across the county overnight. Most people remembered road washouts. Ethan remembered where the water moved afterward. Specifically, where it wanted to move. Now giant drilling crews were building directly across those paths. That bothered him immediately. The oil company arrived 2 months earlier. TriStar Energy. Big company. Big money. Big promises. Landmen moved through the county offering lease agreements faster than people could read them. Some ranchers signed immediately. Others held out for more money. But almost everybody signed eventually. Because the numbers looked enormous compared to cattle income. The county changed almost overnight. New trucks appeared. Hotels filled. Restaurants stayed packed. People suddenly smiled more. Except Ethan. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table drawing lines across an old county map. His younger sister Emily looked over. "What are you doing?" Ethan didn't look up. "Thinking." Emily narrowed her eyes. Dangerous word. "What kind of thinking?" He pointed at the map. "Water." Long silence. "Water." Ethan nodded. Emily leaned closer. Colored pencil lines crossed valleys and creek beds throughout the county. Some ended directly where TriStar placed drilling pads. Emily frowned. "I don't get it." Ethan looked up finally. "They're building in flood channels." Silence. Emily blinked. "No, they aren't." Ethan pointed. "Yes, they are. That land's dry." He nodded. "Usually." That answer sat in the room quietly a while. Then Thomas walked in carrying paperwork. TriStar paperwork. Lease documents. He looked at Ethan. "You still studying the oil company?" Ethan looked toward the papers. "You signing?" Thomas sat down slowly. Thinking about it. Long pause. Then Ethan said carefully, "Don't build near the South Creek." Thomas frowned. "What?" Ethan pointed toward the map again. "That drainage fills first." His father stared for a second, then laughed softly. "Son." Ethan looked up. "You know how many engineers that company has?" Silence. "Probably a lot." "And you think they missed flood danger?" Ethan stared toward the map. Then quietly, "Yes." 3 weeks later, TriStar leased another 6,000 acres. Then construction started aggressively. Roads, pads, storage sites, pipelines. Everything moved fast. Very fast. Because oil companies lose money every day, equipment sits still. Ethan watched constantly and worried more every week. Especially after they built the largest drilling site directly beside Dry Creek Basin. Locals called it Dry Creek because most years it barely held water. But Ethan remembered the storm 3 years earlier. He remembered the basin filling overnight like a lake. He remembered fence posts disappearing underwater. He remembered dead trees piled against bridges 20 feet above normal flow. Most people forgot. Ethan didn't. One afternoon he rode horseback near the drilling zone and stopped beside a group of surveyors. A man in a white hard hat looked over. "You lost, kid." Ethan shook his head. "No." The man smiled slightly. "Then what?" Ethan pointed toward the drilling pad under construction. "You shouldn't build there." Silence. Then several workers laughed. The hard hat man adjusted his sunglasses. "Oh yeah." Ethan nodded. "Yes." "Why?" Ethan pointed toward surrounding hills. "Water runs through here." The man looked around dramatically. Ground baked beneath summer heat. Dust everywhere. Not a puddle visible. Workers laughed harder. One man wiped sweat from his forehead. "Kid, this place hasn't seen water in months." Ethan looked toward the basin quietly. "Then, it doesn't need months." The hard hat man grinned. "Well, good thing we've got engineers." Ethan stared at the massive site a while longer. Fuel tanks, generators, equipment trailers, millions of dollars already sitting inside a natural drainage basin. Then he turned his horse around and rode home. Behind him, the workers kept laughing. The rain started 3 months later. Not dramatic at first. Just steady autumn storms rolling across western Oklahoma. Most people welcomed it. Pastures needed moisture. Stock ponds sat low. Dust finally settled from county roads. TriStar Energy kept drilling. The company moved fast now. Very fast. New crews arrived weekly. More equipment. More tanks. More generators. The Dry Creek Basin site became the center of operations. Huge drilling platforms rose above the valley floor, while temporary roads cut across natural drainage paths. Millions of dollars sat in the basin now. Everybody admired it. Except Ethan. One evening he stood beside the fence watching dark clouds gather over distant hills. Thomas walked over carrying feed buckets. "You still worried?" Ethan didn't look away from the horizon. "Yes." His father sighed softly. Because Ethan had been worried for months now. About water. About runoff. About flood channels. At first Thomas dismissed it. Then slowly. He started noticing things too. Drainage ditches blocked by construction roads. Earth piled across low channels. Heavy equipment sitting directly inside wash zones. Still, TriStar had engineers, surveyors, experts, men with degrees and charts and expensive trucks. And Ethan was 16, a smart 16-year-old. But still 16. Thunder rolled softly across the hills. Ethan pointed toward the clouds. "If that stalls over the north ridge." Thomas looked up. "What?" Ethan stared toward the basin. "They're in trouble." The storm hit overnight. Hard. Not normal rain. Violent rain. The kind that rattled windows and shook roofs. Lightning flashed constantly across the county while wind drove water sideways through pasture fences. Thomas woke around 2:30 in the morning and immediately noticed Ethan wasn't in bed. He found him standing on the porch wearing boots and a rain jacket staring into darkness. "You okay?" Ethan pointed toward the hills. "Listen." Thomas frowned. Then heard it. Not thunder. Water. Far away at first. Then louder. A low roaring sound rolling through darkness. Thomas stepped farther onto the porch. Rain hammered the roof above them. Then lightning flashed. And suddenly, the hills looked wrong. Water moved everywhere. Not streams. Walls. Huge sheets of runoff pouring down every ridge toward the valley systems below. Ethan's face tightened immediately. Dry Creek. Thomas grabbed the truck keys. The drive took 12 terrifying minutes. County roads already flooded in sections. Water crossed low bridges hard enough to shake the tires. Lightning kept flashing overhead. Then they reached the ridge overlooking Dry Creek Basin. And everything stopped. Thomas just stared. Because the giant drilling site below them was disappearing. Water exploded through the basin like a river unleashed. Massive flood currents tore across the drilling pad carrying equipment, fuel barrels, trailers, pipes, and generators downstream. Huge lights flickered wildly before dying one after another. Mud and debris slammed into storage tanks. Workers ran through waist-deep water, trying desperately to save machinery. One trailer flipped completely sideways and vanished into darkness. Ethan stood frozen beside the truck. Because this wasn't just flooding. This was exactly what he'd warned them about. Thomas looked toward him slowly. Jesus. Below them the basin had become a lake. No, a moving lake. Water rushed through every blocked drainage path exactly where Ethan drew the lines months earlier. The drilling pad set directly in the center of it. Sirens echoed through the storm. More trucks arrived. Emergency crews. Company vehicles. Panic everywhere. Then suddenly Thomas spotted a familiar white hard hat near the flood edge. The same survey supervisor who laughed at Ethan months earlier. The man stood knee-deep in mud screaming orders nobody could hear over the storm. Ethan stared silently. Then the supervisor looked up toward the ridge. Lightning flashed again, and recognition hit instantly. Even from that distance, Ethan could see it on the man's face. Because suddenly the joke wasn't funny anymore. By sunrise the damage became clearer. And worse. Much worse. The Dry Creek operation had been destroyed. Fuel contamination concerns spread immediately. Roads washed out. Drilling equipment ruined. Temporary bridges gone. Storage systems destroyed. Millions upon millions of dollars vanished overnight beneath mud and floodwater. News crews arrived by noon. County officials arrived after that. Then engineers. Then investigators. Everybody asked the same question. How did this happen? Ethan stayed quiet. Mostly. Until 3 days later. TriStar representatives held a county meeting inside the high school gym. Farmers packed the bleachers while company officials explained damage assessments and reconstruction plans. Then one engineer stood near a giant county map and pointed toward Dry Creek Basin. We experienced an unforeseen runoff event. Ethan laughed softly. Not loud. Just enough. But the gym went silent anyway. Because somehow everybody heard it. The engineer looked over. Excuse me? Ethan sat near the back beside his father. Long silence. Then Thomas sighed quietly. Because he already knew what was coming. Ethan stood slowly. The entire gym watched. 16 years old. Work boots still muddy. Hands shoved awkwardly into jacket pockets. The engineer folded his arms. You have something to say? Ethan nodded. Yes. Silence. Then, it wasn't unforeseen. Absolute silence filled the gymnasium. Company officials exchanged looks immediately. The engineer frowned. What? Ethan walked toward the map slowly. Then pointed directly at Dry Creek Basin. This isn't a basin. He traced lines across surrounding hills. It's a collection point. More silence. Every ridge drains here. Every creek feeds here. Every flood path ends here. The engineer stared. Ethan pointed again. You blocked the runoff channels with construction roads. Then toward another section. You built fuel storage on the lowest ground. Another point. And your emergency exits faced downstream. Nobody moved. Because suddenly, a 16-year-old ranch kid was explaining the disaster better than the company experts. One older rancher near the back finally spoke. He warned them. Silence. Another voice answered. Months ago. Then another. I heard him tell those surveyors. The room shifted. Company officials looked uncomfortable now. Very uncomfortable. The white hard hat supervisor from earlier sat near the front row staring at the floor. Not speaking. Not once. Because he remembered laughing. Everybody did. The engineer cleared his throat carefully. And where exactly did you learn hydrology? Ethan looked at him. Then toward the map. Then quietly. By living here. Silence. Complete silence. Because that was the part TriStar missed from the beginning. They saw acreage. Leases. Oil. Profit. But Ethan Carter saw land. Real land. The kind that teaches people things slowly over years. Where water moves after storms. Where creeks wake up. Where valleys become rivers overnight. The company bought 6,500 acres around his farm. But they never actually listened to the one person who understood it best. And by the time they realized that, Dry Creek Basin was already underwater.